that runs somewhat contrary to what the rules suggest and what very recent history suggests is the way to do it in the NBA.
Not somewhat contrary. It's completely the opposite of what the NBA owners are trying to impose with a bunch of measures in a collective bargaining agreement that starts on July 1st that is largely aimed at breaking up and preventing super teams exactly like this. But when the Suns made the Kevin Durant trade, they kind of, hemmed themselves in. And when they saw the opportunity to trade for Bradley Beal with some players that they really didn't see on their roster going forward. I mean, they'd made the decision that Chris Paul was not going to be a Phoenix Sun after this season, and they were faced with waiving him and potentially trying to find players on the free agent market with limited money to kind of replace his production in the lineup. When they have the opportunity to get Bradley Beal instead, that path, even as high risk and high wire as it's looking like it's going to be, was too tantalizing to turn down. And so they are going big risk, big reward, and essentially just tripling down on the trade that they made for Durant to join him with Booker in February.
And I want to throw, and Bobby Marks, I'm always fascinated by your perspective on team building. And I just want to throw sort of a monkey wrench into the whole, building through the draft concept in the NBA. I get it, and I get that it worked with Denver. But here's the thing. You don't always get Nikola Jokic in the second round. It's easy to say, we built a team through the draft when you actually draft the best player in the world in the second round. There's not a whole lot of other examples in recent memory of homegrown teams sticking together and winding up being champions. Going out and getting stars has worked. Again, this team was unique because they drafted Jamal Murray very high, and they drafted Nikola Jokic, who no one knew was coming. As you pointed out, they were running a commercial at the time that his draft was actually announced. And the next thing you know, he winds up being the best player in the league. That kind of skews, in my opinion, the way we look at this sometimes, I think.
Well, you're right, Greeny. I think when you look at it, you ask any front office, the draft is the hardest thing to do, and it's so complex here. And, the big trade that, Phoenix made here, and we're, you certainly talked about their depth. Their depth before this trade was basically waiving Chris Paul and using the stretch provision, signing a player to the $12.2 million non-tax mid-level exception. Now you add Bradley Beal, the tax mid-level exception goes away, and you have the veteran minimum exception to fill out your roster here. And I would expect Phoenix to be active Thursday night. They've got $5 million to go out and buy a pick. The likelihood is they still have the 52nd pick in a draft here. So I look at it, I give them a lot of credit. I mean, Matt Ishbia basically did a cannonball into the deep end here and said, we are tripling down as far as how we're going to build this roster. And they've got to go bargain shopping, and they were going to have to go bargain shopping even if they did not make this deal.
So better to go bargain shopping with Bradley Beal than without Bradley Beal, I guess, right? I mean, if that was the way we were going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Bobby talks about draft picks. It isn't necessarily what you're talking about is we have to build our core through the draft. But in this day and age, you're going to have to be able to build your bench through the draft. Christian Brown, the rookie in Denver that Calvin Booth drafted last year, he goes out and makes, during the NBA Finals, trades for 3 more picks in these next 2 drafts. Those are to try to build out cheap, economical talent, young talent that you can be developing on your bench. In a perfect world, that's what you're doing to supplement as you start to lose role players off in free agency.
I get it. And making timely moves that work perfectly, like Aaron Gordon and Bruce Brown. But the bottom line of it is the hardest thing to do is to get the 2 best players. And they got those 2 through the draft. And I think sometimes we mistake that and say, well, you got to go out in the draft, and that's how you're going to wind up getting the stars. And again, they wound up taking one of them with, what was it, the 41st pick in the draft or whatever he was. And who knows, now all of a sudden he's the best player in the world. So the Phoenix Suns, as of right this minute, in the Western Conference are?
5 people on the squad. They are a very short roster.
But 3 of them are, 4 of them are very well known and good.
Yeah,
right?
incomplete.
I mean, DeAndre.
Look, to me, and I love having this conversation with Woj, Wendy, and Bobby because there's a different level of perspective. My initial reaction was immediately, what's happening? Why are we doing this? Offense was never the issue. Kevin Durant and Devin Booker in and of themselves are a nightmare in this league. You add Bradley Beal, okay, cool. You're going to not sleep for the entire week. However, this was never the issue for Phoenix. To me, they had a pair of guys that you can win with at a very high level. The depth, to me, seems like we're setting up for this to be the Achilles heel again. Listen, look at what just happened with Miami. As much as we loved those stories, right? Ultimately, the talent supporting your star matters. Now, granted, they got a whole lot more firepower up front than we just saw happen with Miami. But to me, I just don't know, as we talked about last week, if this amount of offensive firepower, without addressing Vogel's identity, which is a defender, the rest of the depth on that roster is going to be enough to knock off Denver.
Yeah, and a couple of things. So you know, the last time a super team won a championship was 10 years ago, right? Would you argue? I mean, the Golden State Warriors were built through the draft, essentially. I mean, that you add Kevin Durant, but they already had a core of a draft, drafted players. Draymond Green was a second round
But we can't gloss over you add Kevin Durant.
Well, but they already won a championship, though.
I get
before
it.
that. But so they had won, but Miami is the last one, 2013. That was their that was the last super team kind of championship. Other things were adding pieces. Toronto added Kawhi Leonard, but they already had a group there. So we got to see if this can still happen, right? Yeah. And then with all that said, and Denver took 7 years, by the way, to get to the point that they got to. So do you want to wait that long? As I said earlier, if you're a fan of an NBA franchise, would you rather your owner be this all in and go for it, knowing that this is either going to be boom or bust? It's either going to be great, or 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to be lamenting the fact that this guy tore up the franchise. We have no assets. So that's the question you ask yourself. But in the end, this is going to be all about Kevin Durant. And can Kevin Durant win a championship? Because he's gone to different places, try to put stars around him to try to win. And that's what this is all going to be about in the very end. Kevin Durant winning a championship.
I think you live to make her make that face.
He
right?
does.
What?
I love you, Han, but no, I don't think this is going to be about Kevin Durant. I don't think this is going to be about Kevin Durant.
From now until next year at this time, the storyline will always begin and end with his name.
All right, back on Get Up, and again, the blockbuster trade of yesterday. Suns finalizing a deal. Bradley Beal headed out to the desert, marking the end of the Chris Paul era in Phoenix. CP3 heading to the Wizards along with several other players and picks as part of the deal. Now, no one will assume that Chris Paul is going to wind up staying in Washington. So what does it all look like for him? He'll be 38 years old at the start of the season, coming off his worst season from a scoring standpoint, his fewest points per game in any season and fewest points per game in any single postseason. So it's late in the career, and we'll see where it all winds up netting out. And we have a terrific squad put together today, including Windy. Let me come to you on this, Windy. What should we be expecting as far as Chris Paul's next move?
Well, it's possible that Chris Paul could be rerouted as part of this trade, although I think Chris Paul's position really has been that if he's not going to be a Phoenix Sun this year, he'd like to play in Los Angeles with his family. And so I think ultimately, whether it's through a buyout or a different trade, I think we're going to see Chris Paul become a free agent in the coming days and then focus on the options in Los Angeles. Now, both the Lakers and Clippers have free agent situations at their point guard spot. Technically, both jobs are open. And I know that this possibility, since Chris Paul's name has been on the market the last few weeks, there's been kind of an assumption that the Lakers would be the choice. That's not what I'm told. I am told that the Clippers are a real opportunity there, and there might be some mutual interest between Chris Paul and the Clippers if indeed he becomes a free agent by around July 1st. So keep an eye on that. Remember, Chris Paul played for the Clippers for many years. He left on good terms there generally because he worked with them on a trade, and I would not rule the Clippers out. In fact, based on my conversations, I would say the Clippers have an edge if indeed he becomes a free agent, and it's the Clippers and Lakers both trying to get him.
Take me through this, Bobby Marks.
Yeah, Greeny, that's why it doesn't really make much sense from the Clippers' perspective to go out and make a trade for him, because you would have to give up players like Marcus Morris or Robert Covington or Nick Batum just to make the money work here. And if you're Chris Paul, you're saying, wait a minute, let me go through waivers, and then if the Clippers are my preferred destination, let me go there for the veteran minimum exception, and then you can keep those three players and maybe use them in a trade down the road here. So when you're looking at it, as Windy wrote yesterday, looks like that Chris Paul is going to get all of his money that is now guaranteed. The Lakers have they have their full mid-level, but there would be an offset there. Clippers have the veteran minimum exception here. Either team makes sense for him, certainly, because there is a void at point guard.
As we sat and watched the Lakers get swept by Denver just whatever it is now, a month ago. You know, there are all these moments. They had real trouble with D'Angelo Russell on the floor, all that kind of stuff. It certainly feels like there is a space there for him. They're leaning Clippers, it sounds like, or I mean, he's leaning Clippers, it sounds like. How do you like the fit?
I'm with Bobby on this one. I think it could go either way. What I think is important to remember as you bring up D'Angelo Russell is we are entering the backup point guard chapter of Chris Paul's career. And so, yes, Chris Paul, All-Star, Hall of Famer, is someone that you in your head might swap out for D'Angelo Russell. But when you look at the production, we came in with Chris Paul's production averaging just 13 points this past season. This is a later in his career version of Chris Paul, and I think it's important for that to be mindful. Now, as a backup, can he give you valuable input in both of those uniforms or either of those organizations? 100%. And I actually kind of like the idea of the juxtaposition of him behind a Russell Westbrook. It actually reminds me a little bit of what Campaign brought. When he would play the point guard position in Phoenix, they played a lot faster because that was his skill. Chris is still a little bit more deliberate, we'll call it.
Which team is closer? I mean,
It seems like the Lakers are closer, flat out, to answer that question.
That's because of where they got. But I mean, the
100%.
Clippers are just never healthy. So.
And that is going to be mind-boggling moving forward.
Right. If they were healthy, then who knows where they would
Agreed.
be. I mean, as it turns out, they got knocked out there. Okay, so obviously all this basketball, and it will continue this morning. Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.